Jamal stood in court, scared. The judge wasn't really looking at him. "I agree with what the prosecution wants," the judge said. Jamal felt sick to his stomach. His lawyer weakly raised a hand. "Your Honor, please let him go home with his parents while we prepare our case." The judge barely reacted, like Jamal wasn't even a person, just another file to process. "I don't see any parent here," Judge Kincaid said coldly, looking around the courtroom. "That tells me everything I need to know." Jamal's heart raced. The judge didn't know his mom had no idea he was here. She would have come right away if she knew. "Sir, my client is a minor," his lawyer said. "We can't assume his parents don't care." The judge cut him off with a raised hand. "I'll allow a request for a bail hearing, but I won't be kind about it. This isn't the first time a young man has stood before me claiming he's innocent." Jamal felt his chest tighten. This man had already decided his fate. It didn't matter what was true. The prosecutor looked at his notes. "Your Honor, because of how serious this is and because the defendant resisted arrest, we ask for $10,000 bail." Jamal could hardly breathe. $10,000 for a bottle of Gatorade? His lawyer barely reacted. "That's too much." The judge didn't blink. "Bail is set at $10,000. Next case." It was done just like that. The gavel came down, final and harsh. The officer behind Jamal grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the exit. His lawyer was already moving on to his next case. Jamal couldn't breathe or think. His vision blurred as the officer led him through the side door back to the holding area. This was it. They were sending him away unless his mom found out. He looked up at the officer holding his arm. His voice was rough but clear. "Can I call my mom?" The officer didn't even look at him. "You'll get one phone call when we get back." Jamal swallowed hard. His next words came out slow and steady. "She's the U.S. Attorney General." The officer's grip loosened. Those words hit the room like a gunshot. The prosecutor stopped writing. His lawyer's head snapped up. Judge Kincaid's face didn't change, but his fingers gripped the bench a little tighter. Just like that, everything changed. The silence after Jamal's words was instant and heavy. The cop who arrested him stared like he'd heard wrong. The officer holding Jamal's arm let go completely. The public defender blinked. "Wait, what?" Jamal felt the shift before he saw it. The judge didn't move, but his jaw tightened. Jamal swallowed hard, standing his ground. "My mom is the U.S. Attorney General." The prosecutor hesitated. "And her name is—" Jamal's lips curled into a small, bitter smile. They were scrambling now. "Angela Reynolds." That name meant something. It meant power and oversight. And in a room full of people who thought they could crush him without consequences, it meant trouble. The whispers started right away. A court clerk shifted uncomfortably, looking at the judge. The bailiff, who had barely noticed Jamal before, was suddenly studying him like he was seeing him for the first time. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, given this new information, maybe we should reconsider the bail conditions." The judge didn't move at first. His fingers tapped the desk once, twice, before he finally exhaled and leaned forward. "You expect me to believe you're the son of the U.S. Attorney General?" Jamal didn't flinch. "I expect you to let me make my phone call." More silence. "Take him to holding," Kincaid said sharply, waving toward the officer. "We'll check his claims. If he's lying, we continue as planned." Jamal's heart pounded as the officer grabbed his arm again, this time much less firmly. But it didn't matter because he wasn't lying. And once that call went through, everything would change. 20 minutes later, Jamal sat in a small room with no windows. His fingers still hurt from where the zip ties had cut into his wrists, but he barely noticed. Across from him, the officer who had been so eager to process him now sat with a phone to his ear, nodding too much, too quickly. "Understood, ma'am. Yes, he's safe. Yes, the judge is still in the building. I'll let them know." After a pause, the officer slowly lowered the phone and looked up. Jamal held his gaze. "She's on her way," the officer said stiffly. Jamal just nodded. Outside the room, the entire courthouse was changing. Conversations had changed tone. Calls were being made. A quiet wave of panic had spread as people realized they had just railroaded the wrong kid. And at the center of it all, Judge Kincaid sat behind his bench, his fingers still curled against the wood, his jaw tight. For the first time, he was the one who had something to lose. The sound of heels clicking against the marble floor echoed through the courthouse. Sharp and decisive, like a blade cutting through the uneasy silence. Jamal didn't have to see her to know his mom had arrived. The officer who had taken the call stood up straighter. People glanced at each other, unsure what to do. And then Angela Reynolds stepped inside. Jamal had never been so happy to see her. She wasn't just his mother now. She was a storm in a navy blue power suit, and she was furious. Her eyes found him first, quickly checking he was okay. Then she turned to Judge Kincaid. Kincaid didn't stand or acknowledge her authority, but the way his hands tightened on the desk told Jamal everything he needed to know. Angela's voice was calm but sharp enough to cut glass. I would like to know why my son was denied due process. No one spoke. Kincaid exhaled through his nose. Mrs. Reynolds, Attorney General Reynolds, he corrected himself after a pause. Jamal almost wanted to smile. Kincaid leaned forward, controlling his expression. There was good reason for arrest. He matched the description given and resisted being detained. The store has surveillance cameras, Angela said, cutting him off like a prosecutor dismantling a weak case. Did you review them before setting bail at $10,000? Silence. Angela looked at the prosecutor. Did you? The young attorney stammered, shifting his weight. The footage hadn't been reviewed when we arranged bail. Angela's expression didn't change, but her eyes grew sharper. I see. So my son, a minor, was detained without proper evidence, denied access to his legal guardian, and pushed through a legal system that chose to act first and check facts later. Kincaid's fingers drummed against the desk. The arresting officer had reason to believe. Angela stepped closer, her voice dropping. I've reviewed your past rulings, Your Honor. You have a pattern. Something crossed Kincaid's face. Not surprise, but recognition. He knew what she was suggesting, and so did everyone in that room. Angela turned toward the bailiff. I want my son's release papers now, and I want every document on this case sent to my office by morning. The bailiff didn't hesitate. Jamal watched as the same officers who had treated him like a criminal now rushed to fix their mistake. He could feel the shift, the fear. They had messed up, and they knew it. Judge Kincaid's gaze darkened, but he said nothing. What could he say? Jamal had walked into this courtroom powerless. Now he was walking out free. And Kincaid? He was the one under scrutiny now. The release process moved faster than Jamal had ever thought possible. Officers who had ignored him before suddenly rushed to correct paperwork, avoiding eye contact like he was radioactive. He barely said a word. What was there to say? They weren't sorry. They were just scared. By the time he stepped outside, it was early evening. The courthouse steps were mostly empty, except for one person waiting at the bottom, his mom. Angela Reynolds stood with her arms crossed, watching as he walked toward her. There was no anger on her face, not at him anyway. Just that fierce, unwavering focus she always had when something was deeply wrong. When he reached her, she let out a long, slow breath. You okay? Jamal nodded. Yeah. But his voice didn't sound like his own. She studied him for a moment, like she could see every hour of fear, every second of helplessness he'd felt behind those walls. Then she placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed. I need you to hear me when I say this, she said softly. This was never about you. This was about what they thought you were. Jamal looked away. He already knew that. His mom sighed, glancing back at the courthouse. Judge Kincaid has been doing this for years, rushing cases, giving harsh sentences to kids who look like you, while others walk free for worse. Jamal's stomach twisted. And no one stopped him? Angela's expression darkened. People tried, but no one with enough power to make it hurt. Jamal let that sink in. Today they had tried to bury him without hesitation. If his mother had been anyone else, if he had been anyone else, he'd be stuck in a system built to break him. Angela took a slow breath. That's why I do what I do, Jamal. Not because I want power, but because I know who they use it against. Jamal felt something shift inside him. She was right. They only stopped today because they were afraid of who was watching, and that meant maybe next time there wouldn't be anyone watching at all. His mother squeezed his shoulder one last time before leading him toward the car. As he climbed in, Jamal looked back at the courthouse steps, at the place that had tried to erase him in a single afternoon. Not today, not ever again. But the real question was, how many others had already been lost? Some people get lucky. Jamal did, but too many don't. This isn't just one story, it's reality. A system that decides innocence based on who you are, not what you did. A system that counts on no one being powerful enough to fight back. Judge Warren Kincaid lost more than a case that day. Within weeks, his courtroom was under federal review. Cases were re-examined. The system that had protected him turned on him the moment it was no longer convenient. Power only bows to power. And when the right people are watching, the whole game changes. But the real fight? It's making sure the next Jamal isn't alone in that courtroom. If you believe stories like this need to be told, make sure to subscribe. Because the more eyes on the truth, the harder it is for injustice to hide.